few moments in my career have ever brought me to this.
This is, oh, man.
It happened at the International African American Museum in Charleston, South Carolina, which opens this month. 6 centuries of history packed into 150,000 square feet at the historic Gadsden's Wharf.
Above 40% of all enslaved Africans would have come in through Gadsden's Wharf. We've been referred to as the ground zero of importation of enslaved people into the United States.
Dr. Tanya Matthews is the museum's president and CEO.
Space of solemnity or celebration?
Yes. I refuse to choose.
Tribal art and contemporary fashion, relics of protest and reports of resistance.
It's this infusion of trauma and joy constantly that we like to talk about here. You get the full story, but you're going to get all the context in it.
What arguably is the best illustration of full context is the Museum's Center for Family History. It's a team of researchers with access to millions of records that can trace African-American lineage, sometimes back to a slave ship that came into this very port. The expert genealogist here spent months tracing my lineage. And this was the day of the long-awaited reveal.
Make sure you got a box of Kleenex by you and sit there and enjoy.
That's the museum's top genealogist, Dr. Shelley Murphy, on the laptop. She's joining us from the University of Virginia.
This is a tree, just a snapshot of your tree, and I'm following your maternal line.
Wow. That's a lot, just seeing the tree.
You see that box? Well, that represents David Venny, my great-grandfather's great-grandfather. He lived in coastal Richmond County, Virginia, on a farm with his wife Judy and their 18 children. And in 1871, he filed this claim to be reimbursed for livestock and supplies requisitioned by Union troops during the Civil War.
Another thing that is significant is that he owned the land that he's on, and it was 23 acres.
Where did a man in the 1870s, so soon after the end of slavery, get the money to buy 23 acres?
Absolutely. And the thing of it is, I would even question, he said he was freeborn.
Well, for some answers, we have to go back more than 300 years to my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, Mary. She arrived on a ship in Northumberland County, Virginia in 1712, before America was America. Her granddaughter, my 8 times great-grandmother, Bess, was with her. That's according to this centuries-old deposition that Dr. Murphy's team uncovered. Why a deposition? We'll learn that a little later.
And Bess at the time was about 13 years old. Witnesses apparently said they looked like they were Indians.
Researchers believe that Mary and Bess were actually Matabani, like these people of that region of Virginia called the Northern Neck.
We're not sure where they came from, but Thomas Smith of Richmond County did enslave one of Bess's children, and that was Sarah.
And it's Sarah, my 7 times great-grandmother, who changes the trajectory of her children and all her descendants who followed.
There was a law back in 1705 that declared that all children that are enslaved or free, their condition would be based on whatever their mother was.
Remember, Sarah and Bess arrived free people.
So Sarah has a lawsuit that's filed saying, we're free.
This is the actual lawsuit filed by Sarah, suing for her freedom and for the freedom of her descendants. And that deposition, it was from a witness who saw Mary and Bess arrive decades earlier.
So in 1791, the court agreed with Sarah and her children, the grandchildren, and all of those relatives who were descendants of Mary and Bess are going to be free.
That my ancestors filed and sued for their freedom. It is remarkable.
We're not done.
We're not done. We're not done. Okay. We're not done. Let me get a Kleenex, Doctor.
I told you to have a box there.
All right.
But not all of Sarah's family was free. Before the court's decision, Sarah's enslavers illegally sold her daughter, Rachel, and then Rachel was sold again. And for the next 20 years, unaware of the court's ruling, Rachel and her children remained in bondage. When she learned of the decision in 1807, more than a quarter century after her mother's groundbreaking lawsuit for freedom, Rachel filed this lawsuit against her enslaver, claiming that she was the daughter of a free woman, and therefore she and her children should also be free.
And guess what? The witnesses and things all came through, and they were awarded their freedom. So, what do you think?
This is, oh man, to be an enslaved woman, suing a slave master, to do it twice in one bloodline is
And
just
Virginia,
remarkable.
your line started out enslaved and became free to up until where you're at right now.
It became free because those women fought for it.
I'm going to tell you what, Victor, the women in your family is unbelievable.
It fills in a lot of gray, a lot of blank space. There was nothing there. There was an assumption. Now there are names, relatives, and places and stories. It certainly fills in more of the story of my family's place in this country.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Judy Thompson. I'm on the steering committee also of Interracial Conversations. We have Nanette and Alva, who are also on the steering committee. I think that's it. So it's the treat that Tyron referred to of introducing Shelley, our speaker, does fall to me. She referenced Carolyn Dillard, who was supposed to be her partner this evening. Carolyn, within the last couple of days, had a family medical emergency with her adult daughter and had to stay back. So with a little help from Tyron and Nanette, we got Shelley here, and we'll get her back tomorrow. We promise we'll get you home. And,
I'm not leaving that room.
Well, and thanks to Alva for
Staying in that Jackson.
hosting at Mom Margaret's.
Yes.
So if we can get her out of there tomorrow morning. Anyway, so it was, I think last June, I was fixing my lunch at home and happened to put on CNN noontime news, and I saw a story about the then brand new International Museum of African American History that was opening in Charleston, South Carolina. And one of the major attractions of this museum is that it offers extensive genealogical research capacity. The story went on to feature CNN news anchor Victor Blackwell, whose heritage had been traced by none other than Shelley. And the astonishing thing was that as his history was revealed, it turned out that he had deep roots right here in the Northern Neck in Northumberland County in Heathsville. I think it was 8 or 10 great-grandmother who was quite extraordinary in determining the history of that family, in that she was aware of the law at that time that allowed her to prove that she was not enslaved because she had come to the county. It was moving to watch because Blackwell started tearing up And the first thing I heard Shelley say was, "Would you like a Kleenex?" So after the broadcast was over, I thought, I'm going to reach out and see if Victor Blackwell would like to come and talk to our group, or at least see this area. Well, that met with a blank wall, no response whatsoever. So then I thought, I think I heard that the researcher is from the University of Virginia. Maybe I could reach out to her. Well, long story short, I did. I got an instant response. I got a warm reception, and here we have Shelley tonight. And we thank you so much for coming, so much. She is the descendant project researcher at the University of Virginia, and she works in their Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, been there since March of 2021. She has a background in local and nonprofit government work, focused primarily on real estate, affordable housing, and fair housing discrimination issues. Been an avid genealogist for over 30 years. So you must have started when you were still a child. Conducts genealogy research workshops and presentations all over, state level, national level, and serves on the boards of a number of historical associations and societies. Nanette participates in one of those groups. What is that group called?
IMPA. It's
Middle Peninsula.
Middle Peninsula Association.
African American Genealogy History.
Genealogy and History. Thank you.
And I saw the sign coming in Middle. Yes.
Yeah. Shelley holds a doctorate in management, organizational leadership, a master's degree in organizational management, and a Bachelor of Science in social psychology. So we thank you again for coming, and turn it over to you. Shared history, diverse narratives, navigating African American genealogy, and community connections.
Thank you. And thank you all for having me. This is going to be fun. Don't tell them anything. I have made it to the Northern Neck. I've been in Virginia since 2003, and I have made it to the Northern Neck. But I do want to say Carolyn sends her best wishes, and she was just so happy that I was going to be in church, that she is wishing me very well. She says, you need to stop doing so much research. You need to go to church. So she's a big supporter. Okay, here we go. Fine. All right, I'm going to call Chris in a minute because it doesn't want to change. There we go. So some of the things I'm going to talk about today is the role of genealogy and understanding how that personal history and the collective identity that we all tend to experience. I will mention about the Vini ladies because Judy asked me about the Vinis, and because she had saw the CNN story. That research actually on the ladies, and I call them the ladies, and you'll know why in a minute, is actually Greg Crawford at the Library of Virginia. But once I got into Victor's tree, and I saw that last name, and I thought, uh-oh, that's it. Let's hope that connects to an article that came out on the Library of Virginia blog, and it was about the court case, and I'll run through a little bit of basics about that. But I'm also going to talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion, community connections, and the role that I play with the University of Virginia ties directly with the memorial to the enslaved laborers that they put up a couple years ago. And I'll talk about some of the things of the community connections, building bridges, and then of course things that are ideas and things that we've experienced as far as the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and the outreach. Carolyn is the Community Partnership Manager in the area under the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. So a lot of times it's us going out and being engaged with people in the community. And again, there'll be some takeaways and things as well. So the role of genealogy, and of course as a good teacher, I'll put my hat on as a teacher right now. I have my notes, okay? So if I'm talking off to the screen or talking at you, just go with me. So the role, we know there's a connection to the past. Genealogy is supposed to do that. We've got personal connections to the past. Individuals discover their ancestors, some of their experiences, some of the hurdles that they went through, their occupations, any events that were around them at that time. This helps individuals that have a direct connection, because one of the pleasures that I have with the university work and the work at the museum is to be able to reconnect people. If I come to you like Nanette and I find someone and I think they're in her tree, and then we sit down and go from there, it's really about the reconnecting and finding out, and for people to learn. In the family dynamics, who did what, when, and where, and who were these people? You know, the family dynamics is, we might find out that there were family feuds that were going on. You heard the old story of the Hatfields and the McCoys, and was it a cow or a pig or whatever it was on that story? But it can also shed light on some of our inherited traits that we have. I didn't share with Alva yet, but I'm the cook. I am the cook in the family. If there's a family get-together, that's me cooking for 20, 30 people with all the different diets that are made up in the family. So anyway, so there's a lot that we can learn, and genealogy is important. And if I look more at the cultural and the ethnic roots, it helps people also to identify. And it identifies with cultural and ethnic origins, possibly, especially if you tap into DNA and you find out even a little bit more. Knowing where one's ancestors come from is important, and especially, and I stand here as an African American, now I know. I know where they came from, and now that means I know a little bit more about myself. And it's not just where I was born. It's those that came before me. And then there's certain customs that could have been passed down. Researching my own family, I was able to track from enslavement to freedom to homesteading. And that is a remarkable story. I'm going to track that and share that even more, because there's so much opportunity to learn about what people went through, and genealogy helps do that. And also the preservation of the stories. They're coming down the generations. People need to be saying that, having the conversations with their family, having the conversations with the next generation, so it gets passed to the following one from there. Families also have the oral histories and stories, and having that sense of belonging. The stories that can get lost over time. I learned the biggest lesson of my life just a year ago. And it had to do with oral history. But it turned out fabulous. And it turned out very fabulous enough that I'm going to tell that story and make sure I can video it and make sure the family has access to that. Because if I'm done or gone or whatever happens, that still needs to live on, because I can pinpoint where they were enslaved, who owned them, where they came from, and then coming forth. And that's at least one of the few stories that can get handed down to at least say, we know. We know the struggles, we know what happened, so on and so forth. So we just want to make sure that they're not forgotten. And living in the United States of America, there's so much of our history, and I'm saying that as an American history, that has been forgotten, lost, or chosen not to be spoken. And so we want to make sure that that comes back alive. And so I always put out an appeal to make sure whoever your family is, tell those stories about your family and don't let somebody else tell them, because you need to control that, what comes down. It also gives us that sense of belonging as well. Knowing it helps me understand. We mentioned something about the sub-Saharan African DNA earlier. I know my tribes. I've done the testing, I know the tribes. I have one DNA connection to 100% African Nigerian. And and he's 39 years old. And the first thing I said, who in the family was snatched during the slave trade? And he said there is one story of the great-grandfather's brother. And I said, we got to find him. You guys know that part. And then wherever he shows up over here, I'll get that part. But let's get back. And he said none of their oral history is not written down, documents and things like that. But somebody did a book. They did a journal. And they talked about the story of when he was taken. And I told him, I said, that's a chance in a lifetime for me to actually be able to do that. And he's the only one that showed up. And I've been in the DNA since they started coming out. Around 2005, I started testing with the different companies that were out. First one was National Geographic, and that was the first one I did. They merged and are with someone else now. So the historical context is really important because we want to make sure that we're placing people at the right time, in the right place, and that people can gain insights into some of the challenges, which I'll cover in a little bit with African American research, but also decisions that were made and whatever opportunities that any of our ancestors might have brought forth with them. This can provide a unique perspective on some historical events because not always is everything told. So there could be missing pieces, and you'll hear me say this word probably more than once tonight, in the house repositories. And that's another place that people fail to check or to think about. So it's an opportunity for people to tap into a resource that's been around them all their lives. And they just didn't think of it around genealogy. So the personal growth and awareness, there's family secrets. We know. Every family's down. It doesn't have a color or a race or anything. Families have secrets. Some people know and aren't going to tell because, number one, they weren't told. They were told not to tell. Some are going to just be quiet and take it to the grave with them. And then you're going to have people like me that's digging and are looking for that kind of stuff. And I want to tell those secrets as they come out, and stuff. So I don't have a problem telling anybody's secret, as long as my family is okay. And so that is my one little warning, that if you go off onto the DNA, you need to have a family conversation about that. Because there's so many different ways that could come back, and it might not be what you know. And you want people to be prepared about it. So I'm going to mention for a little bit about the ladies. And I love these ladies. I wish this was my family. I'm just going to claim them. But we got Mary, Bess, Sarah, and Rachel. And again, credit to the Library of Virginia and Greg Crawford. And Greg Crawford is now the chief archivist for the Library of Virginia, which is also our state archives as well. So, and this is just a short scenario because y'all know that was 30, 40 minutes of me talking down to, and they only showed you like 4 or 5 minutes out of 30, 40 minutes. And as I shared with Reverend Williams earlier, I knew somebody was going to call me on the law, one of the laws, and I'll mention that in a minute. And it was cut off. And I know they're going to say, I know you know it was 1662 and not 1705. And I said that. You just didn't hear it, But anyway, we had Mary and Bess was about 13 coming into the Northern Neck. And it's about 1712. And this is from the research that Greg had conducted. And they don't know where they came from, though. But there could be other information that was going based on the documents and information that he had. Bess was Mary's granddaughter. They were identified as American Indians, so-called light complexion, straight hair down to their weights, which that's what's on the document. That's not me misspelling. But anyway, I do want to say one thing, that if you do get a chance, there is a lady, if you want to learn a little bit more about the freedmen of the 5 civilized tribes, I have someone that speaks on that, and it might be of great interest to learn about that history as well. Bess had children, and one of her children was Sarah. Sarah had Rachel, born about 1764 to between 1774. So that's a 10-year span. This is typical when we're back during this time looking at someone's ancestry. We might not be able to pin an exact date down, but we got a range. So in these ladies, Sarah's children were either sold or given to members of the Thomas Smith family. And you all are going to know these names. These are not familiar for me except for reading in this case. And Rachel went to Smith's daughter Jane, who she married Charles Dunaway, which is another name up in this area. Rachel took the surname of Vini from her maternal line, which would have been from Bassingham. Okay? So late 1780s, Sarah and 5 of her relatives filed this lawsuit. And they're filing them against their enslavers in the district court here. And that was to win for them and their descendants as far as being free. Because Virginia did have a law basically in 1662 that said babies run the status, and I'm saying it very informally, follow the status of the mother. If the mother was enslaved, the children are enslaved. And that was actually 1662. So 18 members of Sarah's family, including Rachel, were the co-plaintiff. So including Rachel is the clue right there. When you're reading through the documents, this whole case is on file that you can download at the Library of Virginia, and you can actually look at the documents. And so you got Rachel as a co-defendant in the suit against Thomas Smith's estate. They claimed their freedom under an act concerning servants enslaved, which was recognized in that case in 1705. So you had the 1662, and then you had the servant and the slave case, also complementing the 1662 per se about the status. If your mama is free, your kids are going to be free, and so forth. So they claimed their freedom under that. 1791, the court awarded the descendants of Sarah, her children and her grandchildren, and all of her relatives that were descendants of the Marion Bess their freedom. So Rachel Ann, and I left that blank because I don't have all the dates to put in as far as her children, but it's Rachel Ann, her children, and I'm saying that ahead of time. So Rachel, of course, Dunaway sells Rachel and the children to Bud Ryder. Some of the information that was not aired on the CNN special was the fact that Dunaway was told by Ryder, who purchased Rachel, said that she'll never get free. Her and her children, of course, were not included. But he basically is saying she'll never get free. So he knew about the suit, which there was a law in Virginia that said if you know there is a pending suit, you cannot be selling people. So right there we got one illegal thing happening when we got a law that says that, okay? Okay, so part 2, which you're on the library site, it's going to take you to part 2, which is going to start Rachel's quest. So Ryder took Rachel and her children to Montgomery County, and then he sold them to Henry Patton. They also did some time in Culpeper County, by the way, also. But in Montgomery County, he sells them to Henry Patton Sr. Rachel learns about the freedom or the verdict around 1807, and that the district court awarded her mom, Sarah, and her siblings and so forth their freedom. So Rachel initiated her suit against Henry Patton in the county of Montgomery County. Montgomery County, if you don't know where that's located, if you know where Virginia Tech is, that's Montgomery County, because that's Blacksburg. Just to give you a preference of where it's at. Now think of where I'm at here in Northumberland and where they're at in Montgomery County. Because this is made and this is written somewhat in Greg's narrative somewhat. So you're talking about over 100 miles. Easy, easy. Okay, so she sues on behalf of herself and her children, including 2 sons that were enslaved by one of the Patton relatives. So, summing all that up, you know Rachel won her case. But what was key, that what I read, was that the judge apparently, and I'm saying this as myself, heard enough and allowed Rachel to come back up here and get witnesses to vouch that, because she kept saying, I am Sarah's daughter, right? And allowed her to come back up here, and there were people here that recognized her and recognized her as Sarah's daughter. Now I'm going to say it's almost 25 years that went by that she's held illegally, but she won her case. And actually she got sick while she was up here. So there's more to read in that case and look at those documents. But she got sick while she was up here. Doesn't say how long she was up here, and I don't remember seeing specifically who said, I can identify you. But they got statements enough, and the court accepted that and awarded her freedom. So the next thing I want to talk about is some of the diverse narratives, and if there's any questions, we'll do that after, you know, I get through here as far as the genealogy and things. Because my point was getting to Victor Blackwell's grandparents, second grandparents, and that last name Vini, because that article came out in 2021. I just remember the Vini, plus one of the ladies that is trying to connect to see if her ancestors are connected to the memorial to the enslaved laborers. She has Vini in her family. And then one of the group members in the group you're talking about in the Middle Peninsula, the MPOGS group, there is a Blackwell in there. So I was gathering, I'm going to say intel from everybody, that I was getting it because I thought if this is going to be the story that's going to come out, it was the message that you could find. It's a high possibility that African Americans can find their ancestors prior to 1870, and that's key. Because that's not any myth that we put out, and I'm saying that as an African American researcher. Somebody else said there's an 1870 brick wall. And so me speaking to all of you is, prior to 1870, which is a census, which only comes out every 10 years, is not a reason to think that you can't go a little bit further. You know why? Because people were still being born, still dying, still getting married. And we're in freedom time now, because it's after the Civil War. And they were still buying and selling land. Now the buying and selling of property, as in human property and slavery, that stopped. Okay, so that transaction supposedly had stopped. But just know, if that stuff is still going on, that means there's information somewhere to be found. And my favorite collection, just on the side here, is the Freedmen's Bureau. And we can have questions about that later. But I want to talk to you a little bit. One of the things that's really critical for me as a researcher is to make sure I understood somewhat of the system of slavery. For UVA, I had to understand the rental system. Rental, what do you mean rental? Well, of course, enslaved people could be rented, they could be sold, bought and sold, they could be mortgaged, they could be held as collateral. And Lord have mercy, they could have insurance policies on them, you guys. So you look, every one of those are a set of records to give you a clue that you might be able to access and find out, okay, what were the two big insurance companies? They're still in business today, right? They're still in business today, and you can go online and see these policies. So this stuff is here. They might not have known they were leaving that, I'm going to say, crumbs for us to come find in the 21st century, but we're finding them, which is a great opportunity for us that are seeking this information. So some of the things I had to understand, pre-slavery. Africa, what was going on? What was the big thing that was going on? We know that Africa was key to the world. Their resources, their people, and the agriculture, the whole environment type stuff. And a lot of people wanted that. A lot of people wanted that. So understanding before the transatlantic slave trade that Africa was home to advanced civilizations. Those folks that rode into Jamestown, they didn't come out of the field. Those were skilled, educated people. And they talk about the 20 and odd. Well, it's actually, there was 32. But there's 20 and odd. And see who tells that story. You got to know who tells that story. So again, Africa was home to the Mali Empire and the different empires that we see now about movies. Ancient Egypt. And people a lot of times don't even think Egypt is Africa. They think it's its own continent sitting there. But it's part of there. And the cultural diversity around this pre-slavery had to do with they all had their own language, they had their customs, and they had traditions. So it was very diverse. So the transatlantic slaves, you had the forced migrations, you had resistance, and you have revolts. And I know that someone's coming up, there was a book put out, Karen Cook Bell talked about the women from the Revolutionary War. The black women during the Revolutionary War. If you want a good book to read, that is the one. I'll think of the name, but I know Karen Cook Bell is the author. And but she talks about, because during the Revolutionary War, more women were running away versus thinking that it would be men. I'm Shelley. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I'm got a baby I'm tagging with me, and I'm running. This is the strength of stuff of these women that were happening. This is during Revolutionary War time, which is totally different than what's happening at Civil War time. So anyway, we know we had the forced migration. People were captured and were transported to the Americas and so forth. And yes, there were a lot of enslaved people that often resisted, but we don't hear a lot. We heard about Haiti. Big revolt. It could be the one in Stony Rebellion in South Carolina, but there's so many more to be told. And I have to give accolades, just like Bess and Mary standing up. We weren't silent, as in a female. We weren't silent. We were revolting right along, or sometimes even leading revolts. And there is a lady, she's Native American. Her name is Nancy. I won't remember the whole story, but just know her husband got shot, Revolutionary War. Her name is Nancy. I'll think of her last name in a minute. Her husband gets shot. Nancy picks up that gun and she's fighting. She is fighting. And she's very well known in the Indian tribe that she was with. She is definitely, like a high priestess type, like person. And there's a whole story about her. And of course she ends up getting married to another gentleman, has a daughter, and this, that, and other. So in a minute, I'll think about Miss Nancy in a minute. But just to know that the rebellions, so people don't have or continue to have a belief that Africans or African Americans were not resisting what was happening to them, because they were. I had to get this in my mind because I'm 21st century. I've got bells and whistles everywhere coming. But when I start doing research, those bells and whistles have to stay in the 21st century. They can't go with me because I'll never understand back then, because there's no glimmer of what my experiences that I've had in 71 years, or things I've encountered, or the technology that would have entered into anything back there. So when I'm researching, I think that's critical, to understand. I have to leave all that behind and go into my own little world and say, okay, I'm back in 1750 or 1850, whatever it is. What's happening in that community? And that's why it's so key. And when I started even looking at the black well, and I thought, oh, wait a minute. What's going on in the community? Who's there? Who is around these people? So that's another tip to say, you got to know who's there around your people. And if you're African American and you're researching your African side, right? You have to research the white side because everybody's there together. And it's going to end up, you're going to connect. Doesn't mean that DNA's running or that's family or not, but you're living in a community together, not far from people. And you're going to go through census every 10 years and you can recognize, oh wait, that's the same people that was there in 1870 that I'm now seeing in 1900. They're still in that community. So look at the approach of more community-based research, not necessarily surnames, but go for who's in the community and around your people. And the other reason for that is because name changes. And I have a slide just on challenges. The name could change at any time regarding anyone that was enslaved or when they became free. So that's another reason to think about it. So we know Civil War comes around, we got emancipation, we got records about the United States colored troops. That's before 1870, right? They had pensions. Angela Walton Raji does a whole talk just on the women, the nurses, the laundress, the cooks, and them getting pensions. And I'm going to say this, Confederate state pensions. And you think about that. That's a whole nother talk. But again, what do we know if we don't dig in and find out? So again, everything turned around somewhat with the 13th Amendment. We understand that, you know, and of course, we're coming into Reconstruction, which me, as my own little independent scholar, always question that. When I retired in December 2018, I was still dealing with discrimination in housing, which is what kind of started back in the 1860s, somewhat. Yeah, I lived through the 60s. Housing. We're still dealing with that today. So that hasn't totally solved where they said it was supposed to go. And that's some of the failures. There's a lot of books written on Reconstruction, a lot of articles, and then of course we go into Jim Crow. There's some successes, but there's also things that we're still dealing with that has come through the ages and the years. So you talk about the Great Migration. That's people leaving from the South going north. And there's different times for that. Why were people heading up north? Jobs, number one, and also to get away with what they had or experienced down in the South. And so you also had a lot of African Americans were starting to hold public office and things like that. Some of those successes that came through, and including even up to United States Congress level. Jim Crow, huge, coming back a little bit. Jim Crow, the late 19th century, again, kind of rolls back some of the gains that you have because this is coming through the system. So I'm going to say for the ancestors, it's been tough. It has been tough. And of course the Civil Rights Movement, which a lot of us experienced that ourselves. So when you think about the different narratives and the personal stories, genealogy that you come across in your own, just know that there's difference. There's a variety, and there's also certain things that could have come down from. Some you might know because somebody told you this is what the great-grandmother did, or this is something that was told to your grandmother, which would have came from her mother, or possibly the mother prior to that. So again, understanding the personal stories of the history in your family are critical. And if you have the chance, start writing them down, because they got to be logged somewhere, you know. So those journeys and those experiences, and you remember I talked about becoming a homesteader. one of my lines? Well, enslaved, free, getting married, traveling during the Civil War, right? Stopping in Ohio, had a couple babies, and then leaving, go up. Now the 1862 Homestead Act is open. So coming from a slave and becoming free, and then being able to be part owner of 160 acres. That's huge. That's huge. There's a new book out called Homesteading of the South. Now, you know Virginia didn't participate. They weren't giving up any land. My blessed Virginia. They weren't giving up any land. So, but the federal government was giving away millions of acres. And you can go to the Bureau of Land Management, and you can actually pull down the patents and see the land patents. And you can get a hold of the application. I can sit here and tell you that the house that William Davis and Mildred Brand had 2 doors and 2 windows, and there was a barn. So now I got a visual of 1863 because they had to do 5 years, right, of working that land and building such and such on the land. Now I can visualize that this is when they settled into Joyfield Township in Benzie County, Michigan. And again, that's the stories that come down. And then now I can count on the fact that every summer, that's where I was at. Coming out of the city, going up to the farm. Didn't realize that, or how valuable that information was. And that means I was touching walls they were touching, because that little old house was still there, you know, and things. And until I got older, I thought, wait a minute, we're on ancestors' property. So again, it's critical. So when you think about the importance of diversity and inclusion, and I tie this into what you're doing, and I shared this with Alvin Nakar, UVA did it right. When the students are the ones that basically led that charge to say, that plaque, when the Board of Visitors apologized for slavery in 2007, there's this little memorial that was down on the ground between some little hallway. That meant students, hundreds, students and people were walking over it. And it was noted that they were honoring the enslaved people that were there on those grounds. They call them grounds from Jefferson. And on the grounds and for their efforts in that, and only through a certain period. Well, my target period is 1817 to freedom. And they had 1817 to 1826, just basically when the school opened. But what we have to remember is that if I'm looking for anybody that was rented labor to that university in 1817 or 1820, they're probably born before 1800. So that's a whole nother look. And so being able to understand who rented them and when, what law was in place, who's in the neighborhood, is all critical to that type of research. So while there might be, like I've said on here, shared threads of history, resilience, and culture, we do have to recognize and celebrate these individual stories. And that's my task, is to find descendants of those enslaved laborers. But one of my challenges is that 90% of the folks that I have on my list is first name only. That's what's critical. Might be why I got a little more gray than I'm supposed to have at this age. But I want to recognize the fact that all of these things make up to who we are. And it affects everybody that's also around us as well. And how we have shared history together. And we understand that the migrations and the geography is important. And now I think about people, because I remember I asked Alva, where are your Jacksons from? Because I know in Louisa County, in the Green Springs area, there's hundreds of Jacksons. And we know the slaveholder, and they're still there. And they don't all originate there. So where did they come from, or are they connected? For those of you that might watch Finding Your Roots with Dr. Henry Louis Gates, he interviewed Sharon Jackson. She was the black female president of, I'm gonna get there, hold on. It's up in Rensselaer, New York. And it's the Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute. She's retired now. She was one of those Jacksons. You know, when I heard that, I raised up and I thought, oh my God, and he went right to Louisa County, Virginia. Don't know what the whole hold is and why they're all there, where they came from, but I know there's such a rich history there. And a lot of the folks, you know, for my strategy, I had to go around Thomas Jefferson. This was his dream, that university, and who were his friends. And that's all of there's 8 counties surrounding Albemarle County. So I'm in and out of those counties because they're all connecting. And again, that comes back to the origins, you know, our shared history. There's interaction there, the experiences, all of these things that we've collected is talking about that African American community, be it free or even during the time they're enslaved. Down there in Charlottesville, we have a group called Central Virginia History Researchers. Guess who's at the table? Anthropologists, archaeologists, family historians, professional genealogists, all at the same table sharing information. Another way for us to engage and look at, you know, migrations, the geography, and also understanding the different cultures, because the community members that are sitting at that same table are sharing and saying, this is what I know, this is what my grandma said, and we're piecing these things together. And that group, before I came to Virginia, they were already established. And we were meeting at Jefferson's Library there at Monticello. So again, being able to recognize that all of this is going to make up that African American community. We need to know this, and we need to share that and embrace it, and also celebrate it as well. So the importance, again, is looking at the diverse history contributes to the community, a richer community tapestry. So we got the cultural connections. Even though we're talking about it, and I'm going to give an example, and I think I have it listed here. If we're looking at blending all of this together, and you guys might be looking at this, but if you're looking at how do you bridge that gap, think about the typical results of, and I got African, European, and indigenous cultures in Latin America. Look what all has come together. Music, food, definitely. And I don't even have it listed, but we got to know about the combinations and the influences of food. Y'all watch High on the Hog? If not, check out that series, 4 series on Netflix called High on the Hog with Jessica Harris, Dr. Jessica Harris. And they're talking about in Benin, they clear up that myth between the sweet potatoes and the yams right there on the screen, big time. Hopefully that gets settled and there's no more controversy about that. We don't have yams over here, y'all. Let me tell you what, they look like elephant legs. And Benin is where they were at, and they're showing, and she's in the big, large market in Benin. But there's a 4 series in there, and they're taken from foods and how the stuff is getting integrated into the culture. And of course, they're going to hit rice, and you're going right to Charleston or South Carolina and things like that. So think about the festivals, you know, that now happen in certain areas where people are celebrating other cultures and other customs and things to enjoy, but they're also learning. So again, that gives us greater empathy and understanding, because now we're hearing about the struggles. So one of the things is to understand and try to understand some of the struggles and things that happen or the experiences to others. And in that social psychology degree and throughout my housing was counseling experience as well. So I listened to people, but I also had to make sure they heard. And they heard what I was saying. And then I had to communicate it back to them. So as a counselor, I had to make sure we had even understanding or a balanced understanding. Because if I share something with you, Nanette, you interpret it your way and your understanding based on your experiences and so forth. But I need you to understand me and what my experience was, if that's the experience that we're having. So again, you want to make sure that as you're building community or trying to build towards whatever the goal is, that you have the mutual understanding. And a lot of people don't hear. Or they hear it, but they're not listening, or vice versa. And again, folks that are counselors, there might be people here in the area, they know what I'm talking about. Because again, you always want to try to reiterate to make sure you understand what someone's being communicated. One of the big things I talk about UVA is because the first thing they did is went to the community. We want to know what you want. We want you to be part of this. We need you at the same table. And if they wouldn't have engaged the community, and I'm going to say the black community, there wouldn't be anybody supporting and looking at that memorial. They had to go to the community. Because you know why? Because you're talking about the descendants of those people. You want me to keep going? So one of the things was you're talking to the people that were possibly descendants of the people they're going to memorialize. They're going to put their names up on that wall. That means people from all over the world are going to say, I see Jack, I see Fleming, I see Bob. Oh, Carpenter, grandparent. That's another thing I love what they did, because they identified relationships. Father, parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, child. Biggest thrill of my life was not last year, year before, when one of my friends, Lorenzo Dickinson, who is a filmmaker down in the Charlottesville area, he brought us 2 sons. And I think they were like 10 and 8. They were at the wall. And he's pointing to their ancestors on the wall. Of course, I tear up every time I think about it. But that was the highlight for me, because that's what it's really about. Being able to tell that story. And of course he had the story to tell. This is who this is. You know, this, that, and other. So again, we want to make sure that we're all cooperating within the community. And the community is made up of everybody that's in it, regardless of what color. Okay? So diverse problem solving and innovation. When people come from different backgrounds, different histories, everybody's bringing something to the table. Claim what's good, what you can do good, and what you can contribute good. And I think of this in the research. If I'm tracking someone and I want to know what their connection was and who they impacted that was around them, I have to sit back and think about that. Okay, is this person free or are they enslaved? What else was going on in the community? What were they able to give? Think of the blacksmith. Some of you, I'm sure, have been to Monticello or these other places. Have you ever just touched that brick? Hands were on those bricks. Those bricks are still there. Same thing at the University of Virginia. It's all, there's places here. Touch that hand. That means somebody's hands. And hands, for those that don't know, that is a term that was used to describe their labor. Hands mean their slave labor. And it could be that, and I think it's Monticello, there's other ones, and there's fingerprints.
Yes. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Any chance I get, I got my hands there. It don't have to be my ancestors. I just know somebody was there and I'm claiming them, you know, just claiming them and stuff. So again, we all have something to bring to the table, whatever it is. And I don't hold anybody, I've got slaveholders. On the white slaveholder, I've got a black slaveholder, I've got descendants of free people, I'm a descendant of enslaved people. I'm not holding anybody accountable for what happened 100 years ago or 200 years ago, whatever it is. But I will hold account, this is my personal view, and I shared that with you, so I'm not saying anything bad. But what I do hold is, like what you're doing, or you're trying to learn and understand. And I think that's how we all come together, is to be able to make sure it doesn't happen again. And we're in such chaos right now in the world, not just here in the United States, but I think being able to share those different backgrounds, share those different histories, and be able to bring all of that to the table. And another thing I share when I talk to, and I'm going to say the slaveholding descendants, and I encounter quite a bit with the research with UVA, I'm not backing a truck up to their house and saying, give me my stuff, my ancestors built this house. I'm not backing up to Monticello and say, I want my share. No, that's not what it's about. It's about that shared history and that communication and us being able to say, remember I said that house repository? Everybody's got one. If you got an elder in the family, you know they got a box somewhere or something up in the attic or under the bed. That's the house repository. Go to the cousin's house or go to the auntie's house. What do you have, auntie? Do you have pictures? Documents by chance? Where's the family Bible by chance? Mm-hmm. That's the stuff that's in the house repositories that genealogists or researchers are so quick to go to the census and go online. Because of the challenges that we have, number one, access, but the other thing is think about everything that's online, that ancestry or family search or anybody's got online, where did they get it from? Think about that. Where did they get it from? The local level. You got to start your research at the local level. The convenience of those online databases are wonderful, but there's nothing like stepping in and stepping on. As soon as I found that plantation in the next county to where I live, put Mama in the car, and there we went. Went right there. Couldn't get on the property, but I sure got to the driveway where the sign was there. And so we knew, we knew that's where her great-grandmother, my second great-grandmother, it was enslaved and also freed at, and then to find her mother. And that, again, walk the grounds if you have the chance, tell the story, just like you got Mom Margaret's place. There's stories there. Just think about everything that you guys contribute coming down the generation. Either it's on the table or it's an experience, one or the other. The dish. I do the cooking for my house and for the family. Those younger kids are going to remember Auntie Shelley's this, Auntie Shelley's that. Those vegans, the ones that are gluten, can't have gluten or anything, they're going to remember they got a safe house they can come into. You know what I mean? Because all they got to do is just check, But again, there's traditions. The door's open, come in and eat type thing. So methods of collaboration and things, where do you start? You start where y'all have started. You've already engaged. Who's got knowledge? Who's got shared knowledge? Who's done some work? Is there someone that has already done some work? And I think a great example would be what you've done at Mom Margaret's house, because that had to be some research done. And they had oral history come in with it, but they also had live, lived experiences themselves about that place. And again, I'm not leaving. Not going to leave. Not good. I already sent a video down to my mother and said, not coming home. So that is the perfect place in peace, and for me it's very peaceful. So again, wrapping this up a little bit, we're talking about workshops. We're talking about sharing community dialogues. Reach out to the people you're engaging with. All of this stuff is what I do my genealogy from. Everything I'm talking about, the group coming together and engaging, how else am I going to find descendants if I'm not out in the community and I'm not sharing information? I know I can hear a name. And I can tell you if they were a slaveholder or they were enslaved or who they were enslaved, because those things are running in my head, because I also built trees on all of them. So figure out, how do you want to start communicating this information and make those, and I'm saying building those bridges. Because every family has a story. It's not just African American. It's the American stories that can all contribute. And what you're doing is really good. The community engagement matters because everybody's going to benefit. Not everybody's going to like it, but they can grow to like it. It's shared history. They can deny all they want. And I'm saying this by experience, you know, and things like that. I have descendants of slaveholders that don't want anything to do with the project. And then I have other ones beating down the door. We've got information. We'd like to share it. What can we do to help you? You know, and so again, I have to learn about that family in order to find the enslaved, and then go find a descendant from the enslaved. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's hours and hours of what I love to do, and that's digging, you know, researching and things like that. So I think who's at the table as in partnerships is also good. UVA partnered with everybody in the community. Good Lord. The genealogy groups, the faith community, everybody was there. The schools, public schools, everybody was part of this. So I have to say they did it right. And then they tell everybody what they did. There's a thing, it's a consortium of universities studying slavery. Because depending on, I sent my daughter a text, was FSU, Florida State University, built by enslaved laborers? Because she went there for her undergrad and her master's, and I said, it had dawned on me, and I asked that question. I said, because I know about FAMU, which is the HBCU next to FSU, because my office was on one side of the track, on the FSU side, and FAMU was on the other side of the track. That was the splitting thing, was, I'm going to say, the railroad tracks. And I had Housing and Human Services was the building that I was at. And so, and I asked her, I said, I don't know, FAMU's built in 1880s or something, but wasn't FSU before the Civil War? And she said, well, you know what, the county just did, another idea, just did History of Leon County, Florida in slavery. They did? When? What? I didn't know about that. That's who I used to work for. But anyway, bringing your partners together, libraries, local organizations, everybody's got something to bring to the table and share, no matter what you think about, okay? So, fostering connection and reconciliation, the power of dialogue between the descendants of the enslaved and the slaveholders, it needs to happen. How many of you have heard of coming to the table? Got a few. That's a good example that people can follow. They've got chapters throughout. Maybe have somebody come speak to you and share that information. I tag along because I'm hearing about slaveholders and I'm hearing about enslaved, and I want to know if they're going to connect to any of the research I'm doing for UVA. The spreadsheet they gave me had more than 2,000 entries, and that wall can hold up to 4,000 names. I haven't made a dent in 3.5 years. I've got great successes and folks that do this type of research. And again, I'm dealing with first name only, and I have to learn about slaveholding family first before I can get to the enslaved. Because sometimes I only get a name. There's no location, no ages or anything. So I have to rely on some strategies to come through there. But again, you want to open up that dialogue. It can be healing, right? It can be an awareness. It can also offer education. Some people don't know because it wasn't talked about in the families. So again, it's an opportunity to open conversations up and helps with some healing. Some people have a problem with this. I have been at the table and they just don't get it. because they were never exposed to this kind of stuff. Sharing our resources, books, websites. I talked about coming to the table. I mentioned about the Freedmen's Bureau. You're looking for anybody right after the Civil War, know that that collection is called the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. We know who the freedmen are. Who do you think the refugees are? It ain't the way we think about refugees today. White people. They are in that collection. Remember I said, this is American history. We are all in here together to understand that they receive services from the field offices no different than the freedmen or the people that left their land and came back. You know, that's the abandoned land type things. So again, you want to explore, and I'm going to say for some researchers that I know, they're not looking at the Freedmen Bureau, and I'm saying as in white researchers, because they're not thinking they're there, because that word freedman says black, formerly enslaved. No, proper name, and it's federal. That means everybody's going to be included. And it was set up as a relief type organization, 1865 to 1872. It is the opportunity to get exposed to a lot more, but also what might be happening in that community. So again, some of the things that we did around UVA and suggestions, because you probably have done some or thinking about it. We hosted forums, you had people come in and talk, open dialogue. Maybe it's one person. I got to go up to Winchester in November. Somebody's going to talk about a man named Robert Orwick. Why do I need to go there? Orwick's not one of the enslaved people at Blandy, the state arboretum up there. But it's going to be at a church. There I go in church again. Be proud. You're going in church again. But it's who else is going to be there. That's the key. And to let them know, this is who I'm looking for. These were the plantation owners. And a lot of those folks are still in the community. But they need to know that they're trying to come up with some type of memorial or something. But we need the descendants to come forth now on both sides. Come forth and share information. So storytelling projects, you know, workshops, building community partnerships. There's so many things that we could do and things that have been done. And it's also just nice just to engage with the people in your community. You can invite, if there's genealogy groups, if there's not one, you start one. That's it. If there ain't one, you start one. And that means it's a collective. It's everybody. It's not just a black genealogy group or a white. It's a genealogy group, and we're going to find out about everybody's families, you know? And you want to make sure that you can market it. And that was the big thing. UVA kept sending that stuff out. It didn't matter if there was 50 people there or 20 people there. The same amount of information went out and was shared and collaborated on. So again, you want to make sure you're helping, because not everybody might be at the level that you're at researching. You've already did X amount of years, but maybe the next person coming in is just thinking about doing that. And so you have to make sure you're addressing everybody in some sentence. And when I teach classes, I'm talking to a beginner or I'm talking to an experienced researcher. And for me, as an experienced researcher, I got to stick to the basics. So hearing those basics and getting started reinforces and keeps me motivated on what I've got 35 years in doing. Always go back to, there's no magic here. This stuff is not going to appear. Not going to appear at all. So, sharing, allow people to share, exchange that information, have it facilitated. It doesn't have to be one of you facilitating. Get somebody to come in and facilitate. So that means that, and I'll use you as an example, Reverend Williams, that you're not always standing up here, that you're engaged out here. Bring somebody in to facilitate this for you so everybody has the chance to share. And again, you want to share the challenges, the successes, and the failures, because the failures turn into successes. And that's a learned thing that's happened over these years, especially in reference to the genealogical journey. So you can have certain questions that you want to know and have them there so everybody that comes knows what's going to be asked and what they should be able to share. And you can see some examples up there, and just simple question. What was the most exciting thing that you found, or the most shocking thing that you found? So you're going to hear that experience, the family experience, and how that individual felt. So I think there's a lot to that, opening that up. So on conclusions and the takeaways, remember it's a shared history. You want to continually, you got to believe what you believe, but you also want to embrace that, how important that shared history is. And you want to encourage the continued engagement and conversation going on. This is a safe place for people to talk. No one should feel that I can't say this, that, and the other. Be it if I play the role of the descendant of the enslaver, or if I'm the descendant of the enslaved, I should be okay to say, I know the Borden family had 100 slaves. And you know what? I got papers to show that, and I'm willing to share that if there's any other connection. And again, make it a safe place that it's okay to share that information, because what y'all want is information, and to share those stories. And you want to also make sure the events that you're having, everybody's included. You never know where that next good story is going to come from. You never know where it's going to come. And if you've had these workshops and things like that, invite people, especially ones that aren't here, but they know you're here. And I don't know how long y'all been meeting, but I'm sure there's people that could be here that aren't here, but the door is open and you can let them in at any time. So again, make sure you got components. And again, I think of this all the time on preservation. How am I going to save what I've done? My daughter walked into my room this last year. She just came back from Italy. And she looked around and she said, "Oh, you're going to have to handle this. Don't you leave us having to figure out what to do. You've got 6 bookcases in this room. You got to tell us what to do." And I had to go revise my will. I did, because she made a good point. She said, "You're going to leave us and we're not going to know what to do." And there's 25, 30 boxes in the garage, besides the 6 bookcases, besides the 2 filing cabinets. What do you want us to do if something happened to you? I had to go back to the will. And I designated, find a historical society, whatever county and state it said, give it to them. Other than that, it's labeled.
Great idea.
It is an excellent idea.
That box.
Those boxes in the garage, there's probably triple of what I've found since then, because that was years ago, which not as much was available at that time, which it is now. So anything that's in there is possibly outdated, and something has already superseded it. And again, I would look for any real original documents before I go throwing stuff out, because there just might be something that I came across and not remembering. So, and again, keep encouraging people for the dialogue and the collaboration. And of course, you always got a call to action. Great opportunity. Just like when nonprofits go for fundraising, that's a call to action. We're going to make a point to ask for information. And this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to preserve it. This is the opportunity to have your family part of this. I jump on it, but again, that's my world. And again, you want the community to share their findings. And so, whoop, 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 I'm going the wrong way. I want to give a thank you again. And I'm open for any questions, genealogy-wise. And I'm going to say thank you from Reverend Carolyn Dillard, and hope everything is going well with her. And any questions, and I see Rosalind Green. Hello, and I'm just going to wave to you. There you go. Anyway, so I'm open for questions.
I know you mentioned Native American because that was part of your family, I think, when you told that story.
My Native Americans are Virginia, but not in this area, and then Michigan Native Americans.
But what resources are out there? You gave a lot of examples of where you can research, but you didn't mention where you could research the Native American side.
Okay, number one, you gotta know what census, that's great timing if that, I didn't even set mine. Thank you for that, because I left my phone back there and I usually have a timer. She's telling me my time is up. But one of the things to start Native American research, because there is so many stories. And my Murphy family, as an example, we were told all of my life, Blackfoot Indian. Well, 10, 15 years ago, there were no Blackfoot Indians from Montana down in Tennessee, you know, and I had to understand who was there and where they came from. And so, didn't have the chance to go back to Daddy and say, where did y'all come up with that story about the Blackfoot Indians and the Murphys and this, that, and the other? And the Blackfoot Indians were in Montana. You were born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, 1924. Wait, you know. But anyway, there's other history with that. But number one, find out first which census carry Native American information. That's critical, because when are they counting them? And if you didn't know, you can. Do I need to move?
I'm just going to unmute you. So anybody online?
If you didn't know, every census has a questionnaire and there's instructions that you can download. So go to the 1870 census, whatever it is. 1910 is the one I want you to look. But what I want you to know is when you get to the 1910 census, and you know how it tells you 1 through 300, whatever it is, I want you to go to that last page and then keep going. When you're online, 1910 census, I want you to get to that last page, but I want you to keep going. Okay? That's all I want you to do. 1910 census is key. Also understand what rows are out there and find out what those rows mean. Doesn't just mean, and Virginia's a little different too. They got their own little thing going on with Native American. And I'm just saying, a lot of other folks are not researching Indians of Virginia unless it's like I have my nephew, his folks, they had to be here in order to get to South Dakota, to what was the one with the Standing Rock and Sioux. But they would have came from East Coast side per se and made it out there. Know the history of Oklahoma. Didn't become a state till 1907. So were they taking census in 1907? That's the things you need to find out. If you have the opportunity, invite Angela Walton-Raji down here and have her talk to you. Now, she's not going to talk about Virginia Indians, but she's going to talk about the freedmen of the 5 civilized tribes. Most people don't even know Native Americans were slaveholders just like everybody else. And the whole Trail of Tears and Jackson and whatever, you know, going to the Indian Territory. And then that, of course, becomes Oklahoma. That was the other story in my family. That the great-grandfather, William Michael Murphy, which every white Catholic family has got a William Michael Murphy in that family. And those of you that are Catholic know, so I'm saying that is a tradition apparently. And I'm not Catholic or anything, but 20 years of research looking for William Michael Murphy, I kept turning up with white men and not men of color, but I couldn't get the two together, you know, to be able to produced my grandfather. Well, DNA came and solved all of that. So, and there isn't a William Michael Murphy. I've yet to find him. And this man's name is Joseph Breimer. And now I understand where the German is coming from and this, that, and the other. But again, understand what records are there. You want to hit Library of Virginia. They have finding aids on the Virginia Indians and stuff. Did you get to the end of the 1910 census?
No, I want to add, I think you'd be interested in the Project 562.
Okay.
Okay, I just learned about this yesterday at the library. It's a gorgeous,
Is that me?
it's a gorgeous book.
Good.
Tell the name of the book.
Gorgeous book, changing the way we see Native Americans.
Okay.
And
Okay.
what it is it's a project collection, which means that it's that big, the most gorgeous pictures, the different tribes are represented. I didn't have a chance, I didn't check it out, but it's by Matika Wilbur.
Well, I'll keep that in mind, but when you talk about family, okay, we've heard the stories.
Yes.
And so Pennsylvania, I would have to be concerned about.
It's a whole nother one.
Okay.
To the
And-
Native Americans.
But know that for African Americans, now not everybody's gonna like me after I say this. You ain't tapped into that DNA. You might be surprised that it's European that you're looking at, and it might not be Native American. So you have to distinguish, and I'm not going to dispute grandmama, anybody's story. I'm telling you right now, I have lived through this for 10, 15 years, and I got Native American, I got that, but we can go right to them too and put our hands on them and stuff. But what I'm saying is, number one, the average African American in this country, born of this country, has an average of 25% European.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying Native Americans and blacks did not mix, because they did.
Right.
They were in here together just like they were with the whites.
Right.
So, a community.
When you talk about family, and there's certain stories that came down.
Yes.
Generation to generation.
Yes.
And I was in high school, and a geography teacher asked me, do I know my ancestry? And I surprised him
Because you
at
did.
that time because I did.
Yes.
I had the English white, and I won't say which tribe, but Cherokee. Okay. Next.
And that's one of the 5 civilized tribes.
Right.
Big
So,
time.
Yes. And she was in shock because this was a white teacher who did not expect me to say that.
You just stated the importance of oral history going from generation to generation, right there in your example.
Right.
If you don't tell it. And I remember, I want to say his name is Sean. This is the Thomas Jefferson in the Sally Hemings, and he raised his hand and said he was related, and the teacher basically scolded him. Well, that's my 8th cousin. I know how I got to you, you know, and stuff. And mine is not on any of the enslaved. So, and again, understanding who you're dealing with, were they there? Here's another example. I got a Bible. And I just did a talk on analyzing documents and things. I got a Bible, published in 1920. The entries in there are all births of the 1840s and 50s. Who put it in there? Whose Bible is it? Where did it come from? That's going to be secondary information, not primary. Because anybody born in the 1840s and 50s, if anybody's a primary source, meaning they were there and witnesses had to have been alive around that time. We got the family Bibles. I just acquired a family Bible. And it's 1856. And whose house it came from? She died in 1886. So I can bank that's legitimate. I'm going to find more supporting evidence, though, to make sure, because she's given birth and she's given death and she gave some marriages. And so, again, a lot of people are looking at what's in there. And I'm not trying to shoot down, but I want you to think that if we're going to carry that, let's carry it right. And making sure, because again, we have this thing, or I have this thing, that if we're not telling our stories, they're not getting told, and they're being told by somebody else with their perspective and not your own family's perspective. And that's for anybody. You got to tell your story. I listened to Barbara Vine's little Miss Virginia, and she talked about, and she's walking through and showing how, and this was on Legacy Family webinars, best $49, I don't get money from them or anything, but best $49 you could spend, because right now they got almost 2,000 webinars on there. And as $49 a year, you got access to that as many times as you want to hear it. You know, but she just walked through showing that here was a book written about this relationship and this in the Borden family and this woman and all this stuff in England and this, that, and the other. It was all made up. There is nothing. And I sent her an email this morning. Hey, I'm going to Kent, England. Anything you want me to look up? Because that was the story about these people and William, all this stuff. And she said there's nothing to support it. Now, we're not saying those things didn't happen or didn't happen in your family. But as we take that whole talk I talked about on the second great or third great grandfather, the oral history got turned. The oral history was told by my great-grandmother to her grandchildren. But she was talking about her mother-in-law, Mrs. Davis. So you know what? That story became the Davis story, when it was actually talking about Mrs. Davis's story, which was the Brands. And when I start uncovering the research, everything I heard in the oral history was what I found on the Brand family. Every bit of it. But we lived 50, 60 years hearing the Davis story. So, and it got turned. And again, that's why it's critical to be able to document this. The oral histories are rich. I'm not saying you got to disprove everything, but I typically start off, there's two versions of this story. You know, and I'm explaining that because there still could be something out there that I have not tapped in, or the family doesn't know, or there's a family member that's not going to tell. Again, we want that shared experience. We're all in here together. You know, yes.
Yeah, I had a question. For as long as I can remember, we had been told that we are part Cherokee. And I did get to meet my great-great-grandfather. And you could look at him and tell, you know, some people of descended Indians or whatever, you can look at them and tell, you know, they have that reddish complexion and you have those high cheekbones, you know, which, but we had been told that, and some of the family members went online and tried to find bits and pieces of information of where this story originated from. And they went to the courthouse here in Virginia, and they could only go to the end of the 17th century when that line, they started crossing as to become of Indian descent. And they only found bits and pieces, so I wanted to know where else did they go, or what other, you know, avenues.
Is there any elders still alive in your family?
Our family is just about wiped out. We are now cousins and cousins. We are the cousin relationship now. So I have no one older that I could go to find out the root of that, where it came from. The only thing I can tell you is, I remember being around 14 or 15. My he got sick, and the family took him to Seat Pleasant, Maryland, to take care of him. they had to bring him back because he couldn't live and stay in that environment and condition.
Sure, sure.
So other than that, I don't have a whole lot to go on.
You're gonna have to go local and go to who else is in that community around your people when they were there. So who were the neighbors around? And sometimes you're gonna have to research them and see if any of their stuff has some mention about your family. And again, that Native American stuff is very sensitive.
Yeah.
And we know that, a lot of us that research it, because I can go do this and put that braid back down here,
Yeah.
and y'all gonna claim I got Native American. I only got 5%. But because I'm an array plus, and I'm pointing this as a TV, but what we have grown up with. So we're trying to piece what we heard in the family and what we seen on TV and try to understand it. Forget about what's on TV. You know, I'm just saying, you know, we're not running around, we're not running around.
Well,
Go to the family and who was around your family that possibly is still alive that might have a connection. Find out if there were any books written about the area where your people were at. And go in there and find out if there are any mention, because a lot of times, I don't know what it is, but a lot of times these families like to talk about others and tell stories about other people that were around them. And that's where we're finding some narratives, especially like slave narratives or the slaveholding family. And they're talking about who was taking care of the kid. Or in the will, it's saying I'm leaving so-and-so to so-and-so.
well,
You know.
not cutting you off, I don't have books. I don't know of anyone that have any books or that kind of information, but I
What
have
county is it?
Northumberland County.
Then you got to go to Northumberland County history. Go to the history, and you know, if you know when your people would have been in Northumberland, and then you work from there per se. But you have to interact with the other people because their people were here also. So, and again, this comes back to that engaging. But colleges, universities, your public library, the courthouse, a lot of times there's boxes in the courthouse that you got to ask about.
Shelley,
Yes.
I'd like to take this opportunity to mention that there is a genealogist at our library, which I did not
Oh,
know.
here in Northumberland?
Here in Northumberland County. She wanted to come this evening.
Okay.
And she asked me to collect any documents
Sure.
for her that you have. I will take the video. But she has helped. She mentioned being very successful with helping Jim Long. But she said she had problems with some other
Battery.
African American research, but she is there. And I think DNA helped me more than any.
And you know I'm going to put a warning out right now. Everybody can hear me. You do that DNA, you got to be ready for what's coming back.
That's it.
I don't care who you are, where you come from.
Yep.
What you know might not be what you know time that DNA comes back. I have seen it, and I'm a big believer in DNA, but I have seen it destroy families, but I've also seen it embrace families too. But I think if you're the genealogist or the family historian in your family, take that time to sit down with the elders in the family. I'm about to go do this, right? And grandma or auntie, y'all know something that I don't know. Y'all better speak up now, because it might come back out. And there's a lot of things. Some people come back and my brother and sister aren't brother and sister, or like my Murphy side. I wish my dad was alive so I could tell him that I have not found William Michael Murphy at all, but I found Joseph Breimer, and the DNA was in front of me the whole time. And I didn't see the trends. I'm not an expert, but I know the end result of this in working with people and stuff. And so the big thing was to understand what you're about to do and why you're doing it and who needs to be tested. There's only certain tests to test a female line. There's a certain test to test a male line. And then you've got Ancestry and 23andMe and those that are kind of both lines. you know, so autosomal is what they call it. And again, you need somebody that has got the genetic experience behind them to compile that. I got results back in the person that I used and stuff, and then she walked me through to see where everybody kept linking and popping up. I didn't know where they were coming from. Never thought it was the great-grandfather. I'm looking for William Michael Murphy. But what happened was once I got him, and we tested more people, I'm done. I'm done. Am I in trouble?
You're not in trouble. Shelley,
We'll end it on DNA. Y'all just call me if you got a question.
I'm watching the eyelids.
The founders of the church are here. Got it. There's Jackson. Oh, Norris. Who's the Norris people?
We have a Norris.
Are any of them down there around the Charlottesville? We got Norris, Richmond, and Charlottesville, all around that area. Yes. Matter of fact, Norris, he's white. He was a mayor. Well, you're going to have white and black because we just put everybody in there. We don't care. Yeah.